Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Navigate, everybody, on a beautiful day in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California, where most of the smoke is cleared and we are enjoying near perfect temps. I'm Tim Austin, owner and coach at EncompassLifeCoaching.com, and I'm also the host of this show. Have you ever wondered what is the difference between something like life coaching and spiritual direction? Are they forms of counseling or something different? What are the differences? How do I decide what I need and what is best for me in this season of life? Well, you're in for a real treat today as I have a conversation with Amy Young, founder of Global Trellis, Lane Arnold, a life coach and spiritual director, Lori Ferrell, also a spiritual director, and Katie Brown, a professional counselor. And I'm going to let them tell you more about themselves and what they do, but just to say that these are gifted experts in their fields, and what a privilege to have them all on the show together. So listen in as we have a 5-way conversation about counseling, coaching, and spiritual direction. All right. Hey, Amy and Lori and Lane and Katie, thank you for joining me today to talk about coaching, counseling, and spiritual direction. I'm excited that each one of you has agreed to join me on this show. I think we're going to have a great conversation.
Thank you for inviting all of us. We're excited to be here, Tim. This is Amy speaking, since some of you
Hi, Amy.
don't know my voice.
So we have Amy Young, Lane Arnold, Lori Ferrell, and Katie Brown joining me today. Yeah, and we're going to talk about some of the distinctives about coaching and counseling and spiritual direction, and how those are unique and different from each other, how they complement each other. And so we're just gonna share this time together because each one has a unique space in this ministry of supporting those who are journeying with God and want some support around that, want some partnership around that. So I'll start with you, Amy. Give our listeners a brief sketch of who you are and what you do as a resource. You tell me what you do, because you do a lot, but you're the founder of Global Trellis. So we'll start with that, and I'll let you fill in the blanks.
I was going to say, let's, for the sake of this conversation, just focus it on Global Trellis. But a lot of you know that Global Trellis, just like a trellis exists in the back of a garden to support the growth and help a plant be all that it can be, that is what Global Trellis does. And part of Global Trellis is having specialists, that none of us are experts in any one area. So inviting people where it is an area that they've gotten additional training, they're interested in. And so the 4 of you are actually specialists for Global Trellis. 1, a coach, 2 of you are spiritual directors, and 1, a counselor. And so I'm just interested in this conversation to help people, to help me also understand where do they complement each other, where are they different, and what would be good resources for people. So that's Great. Why I'm here.
Yeah, and we're glad you're here, Amy. And we're just as one who has joined the Global Trellis team and has been part of this collaboration. Just so thankful for you spearheading this and bringing us together. So, how about Lori? Let's go to you next. Tell us who you are and what you do a little bit.
Hi, I'm Lori. My husband and I have been living in Southeast Asia for about a decade plus, and I became a spiritual director in 2018 after meeting with one for several years and learning what it was as I was meeting with someone. And we'll go into more of that, I'm sure, in this conversation. But Lane and I are both on this podcast today together as spiritual directors, so we might have some similar things to offer. And yet we also might use different language. I think spiritual direction is one of the most complicated of these 3 to explain. And it took me studying to begin to able to have words to even begin to say what I do. But I would say spiritual companion is a word I like to use, because direction tends to assume that we direct, but companion gives a different image of someone coming alongside in the spiritual journey and seeing the Holy Spirit as the director. So I think I like to see that as a way of how I see my role, is coming alongside people in their spiritual journey.
Great. Thanks, Lori. Yeah. Okay. How about you, Katie?
Okay, so I am a wife and a mom of 3 little ones. I do a little bit of writing on the side, and I'm a professional counselor. So I've been working in counseling for 14 years. I've done a variety of different things, worked overseas, and worked with all kinds of different populations in mental health centers and private practice and group practice settings. And for the past probably 5 or 6 years, my primary focus has been grief and loss. I do some other work as well, but that's really where my heart is primarily at this point with counseling.
Great. Thanks, Katie. Okay, Lane, how about you?
I'm Lane Arnold, and I live in Savannah, Georgia currently, but lived in Colorado for many decades. And I am a writer, a mother, a grandmother. I'm also a spiritual director and a life coach, along with being a writing coach and an editor. So I wear several hats. I'm a former teacher. I'm a former pastor's former wife. So I've had lots of suffering in my life, along with lots of joy in my life. And through my own inner healing, I've come to know about spiritual direction, went to seminary, and love working and walking with women who want to go deeper with God. I really see spiritual direction as being, how do we move through the story of God and within our own story? And what are his movements? So that's what I'm really looking for and enjoying when I meet with women, as I come alongside them a lot, like Lori said.
Great. Thanks, Lane. And I guess I'll just say a bit about myself, too. I'm Tim Austin. I'm the host of this show, but I'm also a global worker who has served in Central Asia for about 16 years with my family, and then moved to Turkey, and we're there for about 3 years. So, but now we're based in Northern California, and we still love, both my wife and I still love to come alongside global workers and ministry leaders. Myself as a coach. And so as a coach, I specialize in transitions coaching and leadership coaching. So that's where I love to do my work. And that's the space, I guess you could say, where I love to do most of my work. So great. We've had a little bit of introduction here. So now we're going to get into kind of unpacking this a little bit. And I think, Elaine, I'll go ahead and start with you. From your experience, how do you see these 3 callings, approaches to soul care, coaching, counseling, spiritual direction? How do you see them working together to help global workers both thrive on and off the field? And we can expand that to not only global workers, but ministry leaders and those who are believers in the marketplace who need support, whatever that could look like in terms of your client base and who you work with. But how do you see those areas coming together and complementing each other and working together?
Well, I think the beauty of all 3 of these professions is that they really are going about looking at the heart and the soul care of each individual. And so in that regard, there's much overlap in many ways. There's some differences certainly between them, which we've alluded to. But, I think at each one of these, we're looking at transformation, we're looking at transition, we're looking at trauma. Each role, whether it's a counselor, a life coach, or a spiritual director, has different components for what part of the person is being addressed and what season the person's going through. I think that it's really helpful when we're on the field or off the field to know that somebody else is coming alongside us and supporting us, because quite often as leaders, we are pouring out, but we need places to be poured into.
Great. Thanks, Lane. Would anybody else like to add to that, expound on that a little bit, or have your own perspective?
Sure. This is Katie. And hi. From a counseling perspective, I think, and actually, I love what Lane said. I just have to say that out loud. But I think that she's so right. And as global workers in particular, I think that, and actually for everyone, honestly, that there's an element of feeling like you have to sort your things out alone. And I think that's a leader. Well. And so there's this component of, I have to get my stuff together all by myself. And I think specifically from counseling, but from all of these perspectives, that's something that everything that each one shares is that you don't have to be alone, and you can journey with somebody in those things. And it's a place of safety to be able to do that. And I think also from a scriptural perspective that that's what God wants for us. He wants us to be in community and to have support around those things. And so those are some of the things that I love about each one. But as Lane talked about, and we've all kind of been alluding to, I think there's specific differences. So with counseling specifically, it's more from a kind of what overcoming personal obstacles or relational obstacles and looking at changes. So it's kind of more from a psychological, emotional, mental health standpoint. And so that's sort of the niche of that. And also, I love that you had mentioned, Tim, about transitions, because that's a lot of what I do in grief, and we can get into that possibly more, but transitioning through life challenges as well.
Mm-hmm. Good. Yeah. Lori, how about you? I think you were going to say something too. And I appreciate both of these perspectives so far. What I'm hearing really is kind of a theme of partnership, on the journey. You don't have to be, you can feel isolated at times, but you don't have to be. There's ways to partner with a fellow journeyer, but who also has some skills and expertise in a certain area that can ask the right questions and to come alongside and to facilitate a process of supporting you through conversations, through asking the right questions, and all of that will help you in your journey. So, go ahead, Lori.
Well, I'll speak a little bit from the experiential side of both spiritual direction and counseling in my life. I have, as an overseas worker, and even before that, felt like I needed counseling. And so I've experienced, that side of it, realizing, okay, these are some areas in my life that I would need some help for. And counseling was one of the things I knew could help. At the time, I did not know about spiritual direction. But later, in my mid-30s, when we were going through burnout and my husband and I took an intentional sabbatical year, I actually had a woman on the field approach me and ask me if I'd like a spiritual director. And I didn't know what she was talking about, but I knew I needed someone in my life. And so we were living in Chiang Mai, Thailand, which has a Christian counseling center. And so I knew enough that I needed a counselor, but then this woman came into my life as a spiritual director. And I think that what was interesting is I didn't always know, well, what do I talk about with a spiritual director? But actually you bring sometimes the same things to either place. And I'm only talking about these two because I haven't personally experienced life coaching, but I think even in life coaching, you might bring the same topic of conversation, whatever it is in your life that you're present to. And whether it's a problem or a situation that you just need help with, or to sit and talk with someone about. And I think from that season of my life, counseling was able to help me in areas of like the emotional, psychological, the mental aspects of the burnout. But there was definitely views in my Christian faith of God and myself and how God wanted me as a person in my ministry that were distorted. And that I think just sitting with a spiritual director, as I talked through that, there was an aspect of beginning to encounter God's love for me that I needed to heal and begin to see that God was not seeing me as a failure in that burnout. And so I think that they're very complementary, but they come to us in just different angles. And it's sort of, in a sense, you could say it's like a holistic approach.
So Lori, just out of curiosity, were you actually engaging in counseling and spiritual direction simultaneously then for a season?
Yes. In fact, being quite transparent, I guess, that yes, I've actually needed lots of counseling, and I've also not stopped spiritual direction once I started. I actually am a strong believer that spiritual direction is something we can take to the grave with us. And I'm okay if I need counseling off and on the rest of my life, although I'm not currently in a season where I need it weekly. But I have had several years in the last 5 years, or actually, I guess it's been longer, that I have had them simultaneously. And even at times where usually spiritual direction is a once a month thing, because we're not taking on the whole ownership of, carrying the weight of someone else's journey, but we're really coming alongside in that, supporting, companioning, helping them continue to engage in that area as long as they want to engage. I think counseling people often go to more often because it's like, we really need some tools. I need some tools to kind of help me where I've had a empty toolbox. I've not known, I didn't get raised with enough tools or whatever. So I think in that way, there's a difference. But in the same week, I might meet with my spiritual director, when it aligns, that once a month with my spiritual director, the once a week. And the conversation topic might be very similar, but I come out with completely different ways that it touches me or gets me thinking.
Great. Yeah. And that I asked that question because I think there's sometimes some confusion around that. Can I actually do more than one of these things? Can be engaged in more than one of these areas at the same time? How do we help people make those decisions? And I know for me, I can say the same for coaching and counseling with the combination of the two. And I work with a number of clients who are actually engaged with counseling, and maybe they're working on some marital issues around their counseling, but they want to work with a coach around transition and change. Or one of the individuals wants to work on that with me. And so I think they very much can complement each other, and coaching being a little more present and forward focused. Whereas counseling, you guys have those who are counselors have the skills, Katie, for going back into, you'll say it better than I did, but just dealing with past trauma and some of the history there that they need to process and go back to. So, Katie, I'm just interested from your perspective too, how have you seen those kind of complement each other, work together?
Yeah, I think they work together very well. And I love what both of you said. Counseling, and you alluded to this, but I kind of look at it as you've been running on bad fuel for a long time, and then all of a sudden the engine won't work. And that's an extreme measure. I mean, that's a crisis type of situation. But I think all of us, including myself, we keep doing things. We just this is the way we know how to do them, and it's working okay, but it's causing injury, but we don't necessarily recognize it. And then all of a sudden our arm won't work, or something doesn't work, our relationships don't work. And so I think counseling specifically, often you hit a lower point, whereas like you had talked about, and that's not always the case. I try to go to counseling anytime I start to see my tank coming down, because to me, it's a part of a healthy living. And that I would rather tank up when I have plenty of fuel left than when I don't have anything left.
That's good.
But as far as the coaching versus spiritual direction versus counseling specifically, I think what Lori had said about counseling or spiritual direction earlier, as far as the Holy Spirit entering, I think if you're any of those three, if you're meeting with somebody who believes in Jesus, the Holy Spirit is a part of that session. And I meet with people who don't believe in Jesus, but the Holy Spirit is a part of the session. But I think specifically with spiritual direction, your focus, I think the main thing is your focus of what the focus is of the time together. So with spiritual direction, and I'm going to let you guys, the experts in these areas, talk about this more, but is more your focus is more towards the spiritual piece and your journey there. Counseling is you're trying to hit on the emotional side, the psychological side, the mental health piece, the communication piece, the relational piece. And then Tim, I'm going to let you talk about specifically coaching, but yeah, I think they work beautifully together, and I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah. I've already said a little bit about the coaching piece, so maybe we can go. Lane, do you have anything to add to this?
Well, one of the things I'm hearing is that there are a lot of overlaps, but there are also times when one is more needed than the other, or they need to complement each other. So I do have people that I work with, and as I begin to hear some things, I begin to say, I'm glad to work alongside you in this, but I'm hearing some things that I think would probably be also addressed better with a counselor or with a life coach. And so particularly if I'm seeing some places in the past that are really keeping somebody stuck, or they are not having good coping skills for how to manage this brokenness within, that counseling piece brings a professional presence that I don't have the training for. I do a lot of reading, and I've had my own personal counseling and inner healing prayer and life coaching. But I know that skill set of a counselor is very important to offer the tools and offer the healing for the wounded places in our past. Likewise, I think there are times when I have a client that comes in and they are very much oriented towards, I'm moving from this place in my career to that place in my career, or this place in the world to that place in the world, or wanting to make a change and not knowing how. And I can talk about that as a spiritual director, but often I can either put on my life coaching hat or send them to somebody else in the life coaching world to say, let's look at what particular skills you need for this and what your goals are during this time. So Tim, can you talk a little bit about that more?
Yeah, well, like you said, goals, Lane. I think coaching is more outcome based or goal oriented, and so we're looking at, whenever I have an introductory session, for example, with a potential coaching client, we will talk about those very things that you just mentioned. Really, just what is some of the history here? What are some of the things you're trying? What's something you're trying to get through to move toward? What's the destination? And so it's really kind of forward focused looking. And if I feel as a coach that there's more, that there's areas that I cannot, that I would not be best qualified to support them in, I may refer them to a counselor or a spiritual director. I have a wife who's a marriage and family therapist, so she has her own practice. And so I get to, with keeping confidentiality, I can always run something by her and say, do you think as from your perspective, where should I go with this? Or should I refer out? And so we sometimes as coaches, counselors, spiritual directors, we need to get that input somehow. And we've been trained to make those decisions. But there's always kind of, I think, some places where the waters get a little muddy, and we need some support in that. So, yeah, Lane.
So I think for me as a spiritual director, one beauty of having a supervisor for my own direction is that very thing that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And I have a supervisor that I speak to once a month and say, here's some things I'm seeing in this particular directee. Where am I in safe waters, and where do I need to say, let's get a bigger net here for you? Good.
Yeah. Katie.
So this conversation is just making me think about counseling, and it'd be interesting to hear, but there's a rigidity to seeing a counselor. And I say that in the sense that I think there's very clear boundaries about what a counselor is and what a counselor isn't. And so that's one of the differences as far as from spiritual direction and coaching, that sometimes I think it's hard on clients because that there's such a rigidity. And what I mean by that is we can't have a relationship outside the counseling relationship. And there, for each one, there's different things, but it's very, hey, I'm going to meet you at this time for this period of time. And that's our session. And this is what that looks like. And you guys can speak to how different that is, but on many different levels, the ethical guidelines and the different things that the legal and ethical guidelines that counselors have to abide by are very, very specific in those terms. And so sometimes there is that piece that it's a very specific type of work that we're doing as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Amy, I think you were going to say something.
Well, I just wanted to throw in the global piece that can be so confusing between counseling, spiritual direction, and coaching is the dual relationships. That some of these boundaries are much clearer when you're in a context like North America than when you are on the field and maybe you're in the same organization, and or you might not live in the same town, but you see each other annually, or there's just, I think that's where it does also get very muddy in these conversations. Katie and I had the same training on counseling, and I went into the program having lived on the field overseas for 9 years. So I came in with a certain perspective of, I'm going to take this training and go back to the field. And so part of my whole training, I was trying to wrestle with, how do I take these skills I'm being trained with and apply them to this context that I'm within a certain organization. It's a big-ish organization, but it's still small enough that we all know each other. It's almost like counseling in a small town. And the answer I got over and over was, well, that's just not the right way to do it. Don't do it. I found that a very unsatisfactory, very unhelpful answer. And I realized that's slightly off topic of what exactly is spiritual direction, what is counseling, what is coaching. But I think that also factors in when we look at it through the lens of global workers. So that's all I want to say. I might have just taken us off on a bunny trail. And so now back to the main trail, but that was what I wanted to say.
Well, I think that's helpful because there's a lot to navigate there within organizations, sending agencies, whether that be approvals or how you use how you're allowed to use your funds, different things like that are just practical, real issues that global workers have to navigate as they're looking for support and seeking that out. So, yeah, Lori? Or no, sorry, Katie, I think you were going to say something.
Just one quick thing. So the reason I brought that up is as you're trying to decide, do I need a spiritual director? Do I need a counselor? Do I need a coach? Is that even on the field? And I love, actually, Amy, I think your point was really relevant that regardless of your environment, you are going to hit certain things. And if it depends what you're looking for and what your needs are. So if you need a really safe place for a period of time to work through really intense issues, then maybe counseling is that place. But if you need something a little bit more that moves a little bit more, then counseling might not be exactly where you want to start with. If that makes sense.
Good. Yeah. Lori.
Well, this is making me think that it would be interesting. I think listeners who are not familiar with spiritual direction or life coaching, I think counseling tends to be one that we're more familiar with, even if we haven't experienced it. We hear about it a lot more in our pop culture, and just it's more accepted now. I think spiritual direction and life coaching are becoming more known. But one of the things I am aware of is that I really didn't know what it was when I entered in. And so I usually use my first session to help people feel comfortable by saying, just answering their questions and telling them each thing that is maybe alike in counseling, what to expect, but maybe what's different, because I know it can be a little or maybe a lot nerve-wracking, and people come in nervous to the first counseling session. They may come in nervous. They may come into spiritual direction feeling nervous. I guess life coaching, they might feel a lot of excitement because maybe there's just a different energy. But yeah, I don't know if we want to talk about like how it would look if someone was wanting to consider to talk it through, because sometimes the unknown makes us more fearful about it.
Great. Great point, Lori. And so I'm hearing you say that you allow that you take that time in an initial session to answer questions, to explain. So if someone's not sure, just I'll come at it from a coaching perspective. I often offer a complimentary call just to have that conversation. Is this a good fit for coaching in this season that you're in? And they can ask any questions and get clarification. I can help them navigate that issue. I can point them to a counselor or to a spiritual director if that's really what they're more looking for. So that's, I appreciate you bringing that up, Lori, because I think some people are kind of, how do I even start? How do I even start to get clarification on this? Did anybody else want to add to that?
Well, I think for spiritual direction, this is Lori. I think that, the idea of the complementary first time came to me as well when I was trying to figure out how to go about, because it's less clear than counseling. I think in counseling, we definitely know and expect to pay, but spiritual direction tends to be one where some people think it should be free, some charge. And so there's a variety of offers out there. And I think some people do sliding scales. But for me, I just had to wrestle with that. And I decided the first time to offer free because there is so much uncertainty and questions. And are we a good fit? Because even if I'm trained the same as Lane and I are different personalities. We have a different feel. And so, for people to be able to try it on and sit with different people. And I also know that the first session probably is going to be less of the normal. And so I still try to move into an experiential part of spiritual direction. So it's not just talking about it, because I think that spiritual direction is very experiential. So to just tell them about what they're going to experience is different than, okay, let's move into it. Let's actually sit here together. And if they're comfortable with that, then we move into a more contemplative, slowing down kind of space. And so that is actually, I think, a difference of spiritual directions. It's contemplative. It has more silence woven in. We're not afraid of the silence. I know some spiritual directors don't even really talk much which can be really nerve-wracking for people that aren't used to silence. But those are things I just try to tell them at the beginning. Let's not be afraid of the quiet or the pauses. And I like to light a candle if I'm in person, but now most everything is over Zoom or Skype or whatever. But yeah, those are some of the ways I like to just help them feel more at ease with what's going to happen.
Good. Yeah. Lane.
And just to add to that, with my directees, when somebody calls and says, I'm not sure what spiritual direction is, somebody recommended, me talk to you, I have a free complimentary phone call, and we just talk all about, like, what is it? What is it not? What might it feel like? And then I actually ask them to pause at that point and take some time to go pray about it and just say, is Lane a good fit? Is spiritual direction a good fit? And what I really want, as I think we would all want, is we want each of our people that we're involved with to have the best support and the best soul care that they can get. And so if I'm it, that's great. But if I'm not it, that's okay too. The other thing that I suggest is that people try spiritual direction for a couple of months, because it is meeting just once a month. And so you takes a little time to get some traction. And the first month or two, I'm also wanting to hear the story of God with them. Like, where have they walked? So I can understand where they're coming from. So to give yourself some space to say, well, this feels uncomfortable, and uncomfortable's okay, but not to quit instantly because, this is a little too much. This is a little too weird. But also to know from a Christian perspective that this is Christ-based. It's not New Age. It's not touchy-feely. It's not, letting go of all conversation for the sake of just sitting there in the silence. There's some purpose to what we're doing, and to talk about some of that purpose.
Good. Yeah. Good. Amy, were you going to say something? That I appreciate that, Lane. I think this has been really helpful just to get an idea that, and help people hopefully feel more comfortable with at least exploring options, maybe helping them to feel more free to explore options that a spiritual director or a coach or counselor we're always willing to sit with people and have that conversation around what's a good fit. So yeah, super helpful today. Will just one last question here. Is there anything what's something in your line of work that is often misunderstood by a potential client? And I think we've touched on some of that, but is there anything else that stands out to you? For example, for me, as a coach, I think a lot of people misunderstand coaching as only being about efficiency and productivity. Like, I want to or meeting, or achieving more, and so I think that there is space in coaching for a more reflective, internal processing, coming to, I go deep into a lot of my coaching deep into like core values and what's important to me, because if we don't kind of solidify what's important and what I believe in and what are the non-negotiables. So a lot of that is really, it helps you move forward, but it's that space of getting clarity too. So for me, some of that is kind of needs to be explained up front, with someone who's potentially, wanting to be coached. Anything for you guys? Yeah, Katie?
Yeah, I think in counseling specifically, it's misunderstood that I only go to counseling if I have significant problems or there's something wrong with me if I go to counseling. And there's been a lot of conversation about the stigma of counseling and all these pieces. But the reality is that we are all broken people. And I have done hours and hours of counseling myself. And I love, Lori, that you shared more about your story. But I think, so I think that's misunderstood. And also, I think there is still, especially in varying cultures, but really anywhere, people say, oh, wow, there's still kind of that stigma around counseling. And actually, I see counseling as this beautiful opportunity to heal and to let Jesus transform you into more of what he's created me to be or you to be. And so I actually see it as this really, I admire people that for any of these things that want to grow and become more of who God has created them to be and to heal. So
good. Thanks, Katie. Yeah. Well, good, guys. This has been such a great conversation. And one thing I do want our listeners to know is that we're gonna add a short bio of each of our guests today on the show notes. We're gonna have that in the show notes of the show, and contact info for each of our guests, so that our listeners do have a way to connect with you guys. But is there anything you guys would like to add, particularly as it relates to what you have to offer and how our listeners can connect with you? Okay, well, Lori, we'll go with Lori.
I'll break this silence. So the last few years I've been living in Chiang Mai, and went there with kind of as a result of the previous story I was sharing of burnout and experiencing the more healing side. Came with a vision of then wanting to provide sanctuary for the weary heart, and just went to Chiang Mai because it is an area that a lot of overseas global workers come to in the Asia region, because it has a lot of resources. But I think my hope and heart is to sort of become or make Soul Salah. That's something that you'll see in my bio, a link to that. But just wanting to gather sort of awareness of, okay, if there's other workers overseas, who is in the spiritual direction department that has an overseas international perspective. Maybe they've lived there, or they're just more aware of the special needs of those people. And so that's just one resource. I think it's just, how do you find these people? How do you find them? And there's so many resources out there. And I think a lot of them are accessible in North America. But what about internationally?
Yeah, good. Yeah. How about you, Katie?
So I have a website. It's zoecounselinglife.com, which I think Tim's going to post. And I'm doing telecounseling right now. I am based out of Littleton, Colorado. But I think the main thing I'm doing at the moment is meeting with people that are experiencing grief and loss. I do a lot of work with complicated grief as well. So if you've got a significant, and go to Global Trellis and you can read about more what that is. But if you're just finding yourself stuck in grief, that's something that I also do. But so I think probably just check my website for more details.
Good. And just to clarify, everybody here on the show today would be having sessions via online, remotely. And so you can be anywhere in the world, and connect with one of our guests today. Lane, how about you?
Well, first, I think I would like to say that I think Amy Young with Global Trellis, or you, Tim, both know how to reach all of us. But if somebody comes and isn't quite sure who to go to or what to go to, maybe both of y'all would be great resources to say, we can talk this through with you a little bit. So you don't have to jump right in with one of us necessarily if you still have some questions. On the other side, I would say that all four of us, are very eager to listen and offer more suggestions if that's helpful. One of my passions is creativity. And so I love seeing how creative God is in our stories. And the other thing that I've known quite a bit of is suffering. And so those don't seem to go together, but they actually do, because there is an interplay between beauty and sorrow, and between lament and joy. And so those are places that I walk, and I'm glad to walk in those places with others.
Great. Yeah, wonderful. So, okay. And I don't need to say anything about myself right now, because you'll get at the end of the podcast episode, I always have my spiel. So, but Amy, let's just wrap up this with you. Any last words from a Global Trellis perspective? I just appreciate you, and I know that we all do, for initiating this and putting together such a dream team. And this is just a fraction of part of the Global Trellis team. And so, yeah, tell us what you got.
Well, thank you, Tim, and thank you all for being here. One of the things I just appreciate from a Global Trellis perspective is how many people are willing to invest to help all of us keep growing, investing in parenting, investing in grief, in spiritual direction, in the transitions, in culture, in language, that we don't grow alone. And so that we can all get these inputs. What I have so appreciated about this conversation, and what I value at having at Global Trellis, is the space for coaching, for spiritual direction, for counseling. Because I think the world loves to have the fallacy: broken people go to counseling, healthy people go to coaching, and woo-woo people go to spiritual direction. And that is just not true. Like, that there are roles for each of them. We're all broken, we're all healthy, and we're all woo-woo. So that different parts of our story and different parts of us in different seasons need each of this. So from Global Trellis's perspective, thank each one of you for helping to unpack and explain what each is, what it's not, and how it could enter my story and how it could enter each one of the listener stories. So there were different points in this conversation. I was getting a little teary, and I was also doing jumping jacks inside my heart, because I love these kind of conversations that help create clarity. I think confusion is from the enemy, and a conversation like this takes all that chaos and brings clarity and helps people to know what resources are there and how to go forward. So tears and jumping jacks from Jesus. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. That's a great way to wrap up the show today. And like you said, I mean, there's so much here, such a rich conversation that we could continue. And actually, I've already had you, Amy, on as a guest on one of my shows. But now I'm thinking, man, I got to have each one of these Lane and Lori and Katie, each one individually, just to unpack some more things. So I may be coming after you, but thank you so much for joining me today, you guys, and for contributing of your heart to serve the worker community. And yeah, again, Amy, you've put together an amazing team, and just so privileged to be a part of that. So I look forward to continued collaboration with all of you, and we'll sign off for now. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
First of all, I want to thank Amy Young of Global Trellis, who had the idea for this topic today. I hope this has helped you sift through any confusion and answer any questions you may have had. You'll find tons more resources when you head over to Amy's website, globaltrellis.com. So I encourage you to check that out. You may also be wondering how to connect personally with one of today's guests. Well, their bio and contact info is listed on the show notes of this episode, so be sure to use the show notes as a resource as well. And feel free to reach out to me at encompasslifecoaching.com and learn how working with a coach can help you navigate your transition with confidence and clarity. Thanks again for joining me for this episode of Navigate. I've been your host, Tim Austin, and I'll catch you next time.